All right, AP Human Geography. My goodness, we're finally here. Probably some of you that come on, admit it. You thought we'd never get to Unit 7. You thought we were going to get somewhere around middle of Unit 6, and we get lost. We'd never come out alive. We're finally here, Unit 7, and by design, it's going to be a little bit shorter than the others because, well, as you know, there's not a lot left on the calendar, and so. Let's get jumping right in there, okay? I'm going to take you through Rome. Let's just say we're gonna get a good start going here. All right, and I'm gonna if I don't do this before break, I'll take care of it as soon as we get back from break. But get those vocab sheets because some of that yellow text you see there will line up with some of your vocabulary that you'll be working on. Okay, and we are going to start up with a topic that hey, if you take some AP World History, you'll become genius at, and that is a historic event called the Industrial Revolution. We've already talked a little bit about this. It's come up from time to time. We were talking about Malthus and why his prediction was so off. It was like, well, because he didn't really see the Industrial Revolution coming in and the impacts it was going to have on food production and that kind of stuff. So what the Industrial Revolution is going to be this period of history where we're going to start to see agricultural based society begin to kind of fade a little bit into the background, being replaced by factories and machines and manufacturing and a much more urbanized kind of way of living as a result of all of that. We'll see that big shift taking place, okay? And then we talk a little bit about this as well, even just in our last unit, all right? And so when we talk about that, when we talk about the diffusion, the spread of it, the Industrial Revolution has its roots in Europe, specifically in Great Britain, and then begins to spread to other parts of Europe. From there, makes the jump over to the United States, and we'll see the same kind of pattern follow through. Higher rates of urbanization, less reliance on agricultural-based societies, more of these factories and manufacturing taking place, all of that kind of thing. Okay, all this is going to happen beginning in kind of the middle 1700s, 18th century, and GB, Great Britain. Okay, kind of where we see its roots, and then like I said, it spreads from there, and really by the time you get to 1900. It's uneven. All right? I'm not going to say every single country adopts, the Industrial Revolution the same way, and there will be some countries that fall behind because they really don't, and kind of get left behind. And some of those are countries that are just now, really in the last 30 to 50 years, have really started to industrialize, and we'll touch on some of that as we work through all of this. Okay. And we will definitely see significant human impacts because of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of the people who, at one time would have been working out in the rural countryside on farms are now going to find themselves packed into these rapidly growing cities and working in the factories. There'll be stretches where the work conditions in those factories will be almost unlivable in terms of the hours that you're expected or demanded to work, the low pay you receive, the dangerous conditions you work in, all that sort of thing. So massive human impact on the people who get caught in the Industrial Revolution. We'll also see coming out of the other side of the revolution the birth of a consumer-based economy in a lot of these industrialized countries, including the one that you live in. And so, a lot of the manufacturing, a lot of these factories are going to be producing things that, we want you to buy, and just this whole idea of consumerism will come out of that, where you have an economy that is centered around, convincing people to buy stuff. Some of it might be stuff that they need, but some of it will be stuff that, it's like, oh, you want it, that sort of a thing. All right. Let's see from there. Like I said, urbanization that comes out of this that connects right back in with what we were just studying in Unit 6. That is a direct outcome of the Industrial Revolution, is that rapid urbanization that's going to take place. Okay. We will also see coming out of this is that role of food supply. And, I mentioned Unit 5 there, going back to, again, agriculture, and where we're going to see where some manufacturing and some mechanized agricultural output, going on. So, those harvesters and some of the machinery that's going to get out there. But I also, like I was just mentioning a moment ago, Thomas Malthus and his predictions that humanity was going to collapse and famine was going to be commonplace. We know now that the Industrial Revolution was able to maintain a food supply with a growing population by, again, mechanizing the farming process. All right. What else do we have there? The role of imperialism. Oh, for sure. The Industrial Revolution is going to pretty much trigger imperialism in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially 19th century, where you're going to have all these countries who have industrialized but need natural resources oftentimes to in the process of manufacturing what's the output of their factories. And as these countries, some of them run out of those natural resources, they go out and they establish colonies. They use their military power to establish colonies in countries that politically and militarily are weaker than them, but have the advantage of having natural resources that they need. And so that's where we see, the establishment, the scramble for Africa and things like that going on. Okay, that imperialism going in there. Again, one of the other reasons why the United States never creates a massive empire overseas is because we, unlike all those European countries, are pretty blessed with a lot of natural resources. And so we are not as hard pressed to have to go out and find those natural resources elsewhere. Okay. Let's see, what are we talking with here? Well, okay, like I'm getting ahead of myself. There's the raw materials we're talking about, the natural resources, raw materials, they're synonymous, okay? And where that imperialism comes in with all of that. And then, yes, I mean, spawning from all of that is going to be just the labor required in those colonies to produce the natural resources. And then once you have those natural resources and you've transported them back up to the European countries and turning them into manufactured goods, that's creating the markets for those things to be purchased. They're making money from that and able to invest in even more factories. It's kind of like it just builds on itself. Okay. And then what else do we have here? Oh, Fordism will be another kind of, I'm not going to say early in the Industrial Revolution. Some would argue it's actually toward the end of the Industrial Revolution that Henry Ford and the invention of his Model T, the first kind of mass-produced automobile, he's going to introduce this idea of what we know is pretty commonplace nowadays, but assembly line production. And so instead of having like a whole team of workers that just, all works together, building a car from the ground up, instead you put the cars on a line that moves them along, and you have workers that have specialized purposes and certain things that they're working on. Some of them are working on the upholstery work of the car. Others are, putting in the engine or the transmission, or they're putting in the tires and, getting the wheels on there. Everyone has their little specialized point. And the whole point of it was to increase efficiency. Okay. To make that manufacturing process as easy and efficient as possible, because the more efficient it is, the more profitable it can be. Okay. And then post-Fordism is something that we see take off more in the late 20th century and here into the 21st century. And that is where we see, with the use of robots and things like that, where a lot of that production now is a lot more flexible and can be a lot more customized because of a lot of the more modern technology that we have at our hands that they did not have, back in the early 20th century when the first assembly line production was being set up by Ford and then copied by a lot of other manufacturers and a lot of other industry out there. Okay. All right. Economic sectors and patterns. All right. So let's break this down as to what are we talking about with the sectors and patterns. Alrighty. Well, first of all, let's think about it this way. As I mentioned to you before, the Industrial Revolution did not carry itself out globally in any kind of an equal way. Some parts of the world highly industrialized, other parts of the world um, still not catching up. I could say fast forward to 2026, there are some parts of the world that still have never industrialized, and then others who are just recently beginning to industrialize. So definitely, it's a very, very uneven application when we think about industrialization and the economic development that comes from that. Okay. And so when we think about inequalities, who has the industry, who does not, right? Who has the factories, who does not? We can kind of break that down and look at it in the way that how industries developed in the first place. Okay, and so we can look at it historically, but really we can even think about it then even into more current times. And here's how it kind of breaks down. Okay, so 3 economic sectors. All right, and here's where we get to those sectors mentioned up there in Roman numeral 2. All right, and this is kind of ways of looking at the economics, how the money's being made in a country when we talk about industrialization, and gives some different ways of looking at it, especially kind of on a historic continuum. Okay, so economic sectors. The first one is what we'd call a primary economic sector. All right, and this was most prevalent, most common back before 1850. And this was just the basic, simple extraction of natural resources, right? In some parts of the world, that looked like just a lot of agriculture. In some parts of the world, that might have started to look like the kind of a little bit of maybe some mining of things, some of that kind of stuff, right? But what we call primary, and it is very, very, at its most basic. Okay. Second sector is secondary, right? That'll be easier to remember, right? And that is where we start to see. So 1840s to 1960s. This is where by 1840s the Industrial Revolution has begun, and now we're starting to see that industrialization of manufacturing, that kind of thing. And so when we talk about that processing of natural resources, that means the processing of natural resources with machines, and taking those natural resources and turning them into machine-made, manufactured goods that can then be sold for profit. And we're going to see that taking place all the way there from, again, going back to the early days, what I'd say 1840s, still the early days of the Industrial Revolution, straight on up into the 1960s. Okay. And then the third economic sector is what we call the tertiary sector, and that gets us a little bit more into present day. And what we have begun to see since the 1960s, especially in highly developed countries, is less manufacturing going on, less factories that are operating within the boundaries of these highly developed countries like the United States, and instead our economies beginning to shift more and more to a service-based kind of economy. And so when I say service-based, we're talking about services, everything from, I can think about my job as a teacher, serving you. I could be talking about services like restaurants and stores and the people who are employed in those, and hospitals, and think about it. It's any kind of job that provides a service to the public. And that is to be thought of differently than manufacturing jobs, where people are in factories and making things. I'm not saying none of it exists. I'm just saying that what we've seen is this growing shift away from it in highly developed countries, and a rise of these tertiary sector kind of jobs and kind of employment categories. Okay. All right, and then from there we'll break down tertiary, and we can look at this in a couple of different ways. And so the first one there, some interesting vocabulary for you here. Quaternary. All right, so quaternary is kind of like where I'm at. All right, you see ed, education there, and so any kind of knowledge based jobs that still fall in what is largely a service area. And so we talk about R&D, which is research and development, people who work for companies, and that research and development could be trying to solve some of kind of problems that we just see in everyday life. It could be bigger issues that we have with maybe global warming, and I mean, so many different directions you can go with that when it comes. But people who have specialized skills, typically specialized education, that allows them to do that kind of problem solving that comes into play when we talk about R&D. Okay, finance is just that. People who work in either big finance, corporate finance with big businesses, personal finance, helping you and me to kind of properly invest money for retirement, things like that. But all of it still goes back to a very much a service base, because of all those I'm talking about, no one is actually like making a thing. Okay, no one's producing a what are they use the term widget for kind of an imaginary product that widget, WIDGIT, I think that's how you spell it, and it's kind of like what you use for to stand in place of instead of saying making cars or making that kind of thing. So anyhow, none of those that I'm describing to you are doing anything like that. All right, and then quinary is the other kind of subset of the tertiary sector, and these are the people who are in kind of the class of, not necessarily saying that they're the wealthy people, because you're not always a billionaires because you're a decision maker. But in highly developed countries, there's a little bit more of a correlation between the people who are in the big decision-making roles and considered to be in the quote-unquote leadership class. That could be political, that could be business, anything like that. And with all of that, we're talking about again, service-based. They're not making something; they're using their leadership skills to get things accomplished, and that sort of an idea. Okay, let's see, where are we going from there? Industrialization. All right, so when we see countries who begin to industrialize, and so we start seeing this process happen back in the late 18th century, going into the 19th century, and so you start to see that primary sector begin to shrink away. All right, and that's kind of like, again, people, farming and those sorts of things begin to diminish. You still have enough farmers to feed a country, but again, it's not going to be an emphasis on agricultural activity. And we start to see that manufacturing begin to pick up. All right, that secondary sector. So we got that one going on. And then as an aspect of that, we have what we call the multiplier effect. And that is where, like it says there, jobs that provide additional jobs. And this can go in different directions. I talk about including the reverse effect that can happen sometimes, because sometimes the removal of jobs can also result in other jobs going away. So if you've got a massive factory that employs 3,000 workers, there's probably a really good chance that there's going to be coffee shops around it, maybe little restaurants, fast food places, and they're going to be able to stay in business by and large just from those employees. Okay, they get their lunch hour, and or they're stopping on the way to work to get their coffee, all that kind of thing. Now, if that business suddenly starts falling on hard times and they have to lay off 30% of their workforce, those businesses around them are going to feel the effect of it. Okay, and that is where that multiplier effect comes into play, is that they're going to be hit negatively by that. Now, if on the flip side of that, if things are going great in that factory, it's like, what, we're going to increase production, we're going to expand our factory, and we're going to hire 2,000 more workers, then the multiplier effect is going to be that, bam, you're going to have those restaurants, you're going to have those coffee shops, you're going to have everyone else that, has an economic connection to that are going to be able to start hiring as well and be able to expand as well. And so we have that kind of a thing that goes on. Like I said, it can work in both directions, right? To the good and to the not so good, right? Okay. So now here we jump into, luckily I can tell you right now, we're not going to get into a ton of models like we did, with locating of cities and how cities are laid out. But we are going to talk a bit here about the kind of the science that or the math that goes into where do you build factories. Okay, if you're going to industrialize, you're not just throwing darts in a map and say that looks good right there. There's got to be some thought into this. And when we look at where factories are located in highly developed countries, developing countries, you can see there's a method to the madness. It is not random, all right? And so we'll start breaking this down. So one of those theories is what is called the least cost theory. And it's kind of, again, self-explanatory. This isn't like rocket science here. And so here's how we break that one down, okay? So you think about, all right, whatever the widget is that I produce in my factory, I need this, this, and this to be able to produce it. Okay, I've got all these different resources that I need to have access to produce my widgets. And so one of the things that's going to go into my thinking when it comes to where am I going to build my factory is I want it to be somewhere that is either centrally or at least somehow closely connected to where those resources are. Okay, I don't want to have to pay for massive transportation costs to get those resources to my factories, because that's going to cut into my profits. And if I'm not making profits, then why am I in business, right? And I'm probably going to be quickly out of business, all right? But I also want to think about where am I going to sell my finished widgets, all right? Where are they going to, once I've manufactured them, where are they going to be retailed, and where are they going to be sold to the consumers? And I don't want, again, flip side, I don't want to be paying incredible transportation costs for that either, because it eats into my profits. So I'm starting to think about, all right, where do I place my factory that is going to have the least amount of a hit for me and maximize the kind of profits that I can make? That's where we start talking about, least cost. What is going to cost me the least in terms of accessing the resources I need and getting my finished product to retail, to market, okay? And that'll take us right here. Oh, and yes, before I almost danced right away from this one, you definitely have to think about the weight of those widgets you're making, okay? If you're producing something that's really, really lightweight, then transportation is going to be one thing. And it's like, I can afford to transport a little bit long, further on out, because, there's not a lot of weight to it, and it makes it easier to transport. But if that widget that you produce is something that by its very nature is really heavy, that is going to impact your transportation costs. It is not going to be, it's going to take more money to transport it based on that weight, okay? And because it's going to probably take away some options. Some things might be so heavy, you can't even think about using trucks to get them. You're going to have to use, freight trains, and that's going to cost you more than trucking them. And so, what that widget is, if it is something that, has the potential of being profitable, but it's very, very heavy, then you got to add that into the factoring as well, okay? So again, there's a method to this, and you have to be thinking about all these different factors when you decide where on the map am I going to build a factory, okay? See, you thought it was so easy, yeah. And within that concept of weight, there is what we call bulk reducing and bulk gaining industries. So bulk reducing and bulk gaining, let me explain really quick. So a bulk reducing industry is what we have when we talk about something that is easy to transport, okay? Costs less money. Bulk reducing less, okay? And so, that one you don't have to worry so much. I mean, trying to kind of keep profits under control, that kind of thing. Operating expenses, it's all good with bulk reducing, right? And then, yes, you can guess where I'm going with bulk gaining. Bulk gaining is those are the heavy products. Those are the ones that are more difficult to transport. You might not have as many options on how you can transport them, given the weight of them. Okay, so when it comes to weight, understand that concept: bulk reducing and bulk gaining. All right, and again, by the terminology, I think they're kind of self-explanatory. All right. And then, of course, if you are looking to locate that factory, you also have to think about energy sources. are you producing a widget that where you need a good steady access to water? Are you going to need a resource like coal? Depending on how you power up your factory, are you going to be an electrically powered? Are you going to go with solar? But you also have to think about, if you're building a large facility that you're going to be doing manufacturing from, you're going to have some way of keeping all your machines running. And you have to think about that. You have to think about, is it already exist where you want to build the factory? Are you going to have to bring those kinds of energy sources to your factory? And how much is that going to cost as well? Okay. So again, lots of things you got to just take into account when you're talking about where you're going to plop in a factory, right? Which gets us to Weber's. All right. I know it looks like Weber. But he's a German. It goes back to Alfred Weber. I think it's going to get really German about it. Weber, because that W always is pronounced with a V. And he is a German economist who comes up with this concept of least cost theory. All right, and so, man, if we were in class, I'd be doing this on the whiteboard. So it's something like this. Okay, watch my little cursor here. So pretty much what he's saying is, all right. So you've got your market in one place. You've got resources here. Maybe you got some of your other resources over here. It's kind of like you're trying to figure out where are all the things you need in order to produce the good that you want, and then also be able to get it to market in a fairly quick way. And what you're doing is, in effect, you're trying to find the middle ground there. And so you would build your factory right about the center of that little triangle there, okay? And that way you're kind of equidistant in terms of gaining the resources, access to the resources you need, and then also then getting that product to marketplaces, right? That is kind of his least cost theory. And so, what he's pretty much saying is, at the end of it all the different things I talked about there on the prior slide, it comes down to the biggies, okay? How much is it going to cost for you to transport things? Resources to your factory, finished goods from your factory to market, right? Those kinds of things. How much is it going to cost to produce your widget? Okay, what are the labor costs going to be? How much you have to pay for those natural resources? How much do you have to pay for your employees who are working there? Okay, all of those are the kind of labor costs and material costs are going to go into all of that. And then we have what is called agglomeration economies. And this is where you are looking for, where can I share costs? Okay, maybe if your factory is powered up by electricity, well, you probably have other buildings in the general vicinity that also need electricity, and so it's not like you're going to have to pay, from scratch to have electricity, brought from, a different city, cables or, electrical lines, whatever it may be. And you have to absorb that cost because there's probably going to be others who need it as well. And so you're going to be able to kind of spread costs around with someone else. Okay. Same with transportation, right? So, you're going to need maybe railroad to, that is going to be a good option for you to get your goods to market. Well, if you've got others in the area that likewise will need the same thing, then maybe there's going to be, building out some of that rail line is something that is going to be shared between different businesses. Maybe you show that your government, that how that's going to help the general economy of the entire region, and so government will even chip in with the building of that railroad. That's what we're talking about with that agglomeration, is just this idea of kind of combining everything together, and where you have a bunch of factories that go together and kind of share out the costs, all kind of take a little bit of the hit, so that everyone gets to benefit from it. Okay, and so Weber is saying that those are the kind of things you want to take into account, the biggies that you want to take into account, and he's not saying that is it, but those are the three big factors. Okay, and so what you see up above there, and here it is again, is what we call the locational triangle. And yeah, in reality, this doesn't always work out perfectly, because then you have to apply it across geography, where there might be mountains or rivers or something that's going to have some impact on that. But it goes back to the idea still that, when it comes to the location of a factory, of a manufacturing center, that you're trying to find as close to the middle that you can get to all of these different places, because that's going to be, like it says there, your least transport cost point. You're going to spend the least amount of money paying for gas or paying for diesel or what, and the upkeep of vehicles and things like that. Okay. Let's see. We also have the Loesch theory. Loesch theory. Okay. And that is I'm trying to remember what his first name was. Harold Loesch, and I forget the rest of his history in terms of where he came from and all that. Bottom line, all we need to know with him is that if the widget that you're making happens to be something that maybe there's like high demand and low supply, so you get to really make some good profits from it. In those kind of cases, then if you got to pay more when it comes to some of those factors in the least cost theory, it's okay. All right. That some of those costs are okay to absorb the higher cost, because if it is a supply demand issue and you have advantage there, you're still going to be all right. You're still going to end up making a lot of profits. All right. And so that's kind of like a little carve out, a little of Weber's least cost theory is there are exceptions, and if it happens to be that the widget you make, everyone wants the widget and there's not a lot of them to go around, then you can absorb a little bit of some of the higher costs when it comes to some of those factors and some of those production costs. All right. And then we have maybe that's Harold. That's right. That's Harold. Oh, who is Loesch? Oh no, that's probably what I'm gonna still be thinking about tonight when I try to fall asleep. Is what was his first name? Oh well. It's Harold Hotelling. Okay, and another economist, and his theory has to do with when you're competing against other businesses, and then the use of space. And what he kind of goes with is the idea that, so a lot of times people think that, it's like, okay, if I've got a business and, well, no, let's just say you want to start a business and you're moving into a new area, but there's already a competitor that's there. Okay. And, and to some people, common sense would tell you then don't open up near them. Maybe open up your business on the other side of town, and that way you can kind of maybe draw from a different customer base than that other business on the other side of town. All right. Hoteling is kind of saying, no, don't do that. Okay. And he does use this little beach example here. And, he's saying that, again, common sense is going to tell you that if you want to open up a little, maybe a little hot dog stand down on the beach, and there's already it's in business down there, that you're thinking, okay, then I'm going to open mine up way down here on the other end of the beach. And Hodling is saying, no, actually, open it up there in the B spot, really close to A, okay? And then maybe, you lower your prices a little bit. You sell your hot dogs for 25 cents less than the competitor for A there. And you just make that competition head to head. And people will come to you wherever they are on the beach because they know that's where the hot dog salesmen are. And then once they get there, they're going to look at both hot dog stands and, well, this one's cheaper. That's where I'm going. Right. And so that's what he's talking about with competition and space. Another way of thinking about it, if any of you have ever been, whether it's in Vancouver or down in Portland, especially where that's kind of known in different places in the United States, but food cart villages, okay? That's the whole idea behind those. Why spread yourselves all over the city and, kind of force your customers to put everything all together in one place. And, and that's going to draw more people, all right, who are going to come there, and they're going to take a look and see, what are things priced and what are the different kind of options that are there, and they'll find something to spend money on, okay, and so that's kind of where you're going with his theory, and I'm going to hit the brakes right there, because I'm already over 30 minutes, and but hey, that gets us a little bit of a start going, all right, and we'll jump right back into it when we are back together in class. So you got that? And yeah. We'll see you later.